All right, I've got this scene from a dry creek bed here that I'm going to be painting today. I've wet both sides of my paper with this sponge, and then I've kind of used that sponge to sop up the extra moisture so it's not completely soaked. So now it's laying mostly flat, and I've just got some warmish brown gray color mixed up here for the ground. So I'm just gonna start laying that in. It's a very light color. Might warm it up a little more in the foreground, just a little. And there's these cooler colored rocks on the left side. So even though this is the first wash, I can start hinting at some of that right away and let those colors bleed and fuzz into each other. First wash is all about fuzzy edges and big colors. It's very impressionistic. We are not worrying about detail in this stage. Essentially what we're doing is getting rid of the white of the paper. Unless there's any specific areas where we want a pure white highlight left on, which I'm probably going to do for some of these rocks on the left, and then some of these rocks over here. I'll just leave a few pure white spots here and there just to hint at that detail. And if I find that I need more of that detail, I can just go back in with white gouache at the end and add it very easily. So just continuing adding this warm, kind of sandy gray color for this sand. I'm going to add some more cobalt blue here for these cooler colored rocks. Then we've got kind of this dull green foliage in the middle here. So I'm just going to take some yellow ochre, which is a duller yellow. Let's see, what do I want to do? Probably cobalt blue. Cobalt blue and yellow ochre can make a very nice dulled down green. It's kind of a dusty green. For whatever these plants are right here. It's a little too dark, so I'll add some more water and that'll bring the value down a little bit. And I'm letting the color of these plants right here just bleed right into the ground color. It's all bleeding together. No separation happening at this stage. Again, very impressionistic and loose. That's what you want in the first stage, which is why I want both sides of my paper wet, because that makes the paper stay wet for longer. I don't want to have this edge dry out while I'm working over here, and then by the time I get back to this edge is dry, and if I try to blend this edge wet into dry, it's not going to look like one clean wash that goes together. it's gonna have a weird jagged edge to it, and I want this to be clean, done in one go. I want it to look fresh and spontaneous and fun, and having a good first wash really helps with that. So I'm just dropping in some areas of warm here and there, just kind of hinting at the direction that the land is flowing. So just continuing the wash up. Usually I start with the sky, but for some reason I decided today we would start with the ground. Sometimes it's nice to mix things up a little bit. Keeps it interesting and fresh. So I'm gonna mix more of that greenish color for, you got, looks like more of the same kind of plant back in this area here. So just more of that yellow ochre, cobalt blue. Gives you a nice, dull, earthy green. It's a really pretty color. Sometimes you want vibrant greens, and there's plenty of ways that you can get those. I will use a slightly more vibrant green for this tree, but not too much. I don't want it to be jarring. I want it all to look like it belongs in the same painting. I'll just throw in some of that same greenish color for these plants over here. Painting around this tree because this tree is going to have yellow leaves. So I'm leaving that white because I want that yellow to really pop as much as it can. We'll just use that same color for the background here. Nice, loose, everything's blending and flowing together. I have a bigger palette on the way, which will make this much easier to do in one go. I'll be able to have more colors pre-mixed. You'll notice something I'm doing. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. You can barely see right here. I have a little rag, all right? What this rag is for is if I feel there's too much water on my brush, I can just tap into the rag, get some of that excess water off of the brush. So you have too much water on the brush. Say if I'm painting this area and I hadn't gotten rid of that excess water, you get what's called cauliflower edges, where you can see a very sharp line where the new water is kind of bleeding into the old water that you've already put down. Some artists intentionally do those, and I've intentionally done those before, but to be honest, most of the time those have happened. It's not intentional, it's accidental. I'm not that good to say like, oh yeah, here, I want to have a cauliflower edge. So I have this little rag. It's just an old washcloth, and you can use a sponge or a paper towel. I actually have a paper towel too, but this is more for if I need to quickly clean my brush off, or more so my palette. I can do that. So adding more of this warm color. You see how, since that edge was still wet, I can effortlessly blend this color back in. The second wash is where we're going to be more concerned about defining the shapes of things. See, I can just paint right through the trunk of that tree because that's going to be darker. Anything that's going to be darker than the first wash, you can just paint right through. You don't have to worry about painting around anything except pure white in the first wash. So, painting this bank here. Had to jump a barbed wire fence to get this shot. It was off the I-17 heading up to Prescott. Decided today would be a good day to get some reference photos. Nice way to spend the Sunday. Okay. I need some more of this earthy green. See, when I get my bigger palette, I will have more of these colors mixed ahead of time, just in different puddles around the palette. That will make this unbelievably easier. It's still doable now, and it's definitely taught me how to mix colors quickly and how to make decisions fast. I had a little splatter happen on accident there, and that's no worries at all. You can just kind of swipe it away with your finger. So just loosely giving the impression of these trees. And I'm using a very big mop brush. I actually just got this today. It's a Winsor Newton medium synthetic squirrel. I like using big brushes like this, especially in the first wash, because it forces you to paint more in terms of big shapes, big colors. It's more impressionistic. All right. Okay, so don't want any white there, not in this painting. I'll drop in some of the orange, yellowy color for that tree. I'm just mixing it into some of this grayish color on the palette because the pure orange is, I think this is cadmium orange, is a little too potent. So we want something a little more earthy like that. One of the reasons I wanted to, oops, these areas are supposed to be orange. So I can just lift up that paint with this paper towel while it's still wet pretty easily, and then I can just drop that right in. I'll drop this in here too, why not? And I'm going to paint the sky next. What I was saying, I wanted to go take pictures today because of the fall colors happening. All right. There are some orangey, yellowy colors in this tree. I think I'm going to drop those in now, doing something a little unusual in that I usually paint the sky first. But since I want these orange areas to really stand out, I'm painting those areas first so I can paint around it with the sky color. I'm even going to, how do I want to do this? I think I might leave that as it is and go straight into the sky. We're experimenting today. Not sure how this is going to turn out, but it'll turn out some way, somehow. So I just mixed up a few different blues until I got a color that I like, just cobalt blue, cerulean blue, a few others thrown in there. I, most of the time, will paint skies from the top to the bottom. And you'll notice that the sky, and this is almost a rule you can follow most of the time, skies get lighter as they move towards the horizon. Again, most of the time, not always. So I'm just painting around the very edge of this tree here, because I want the leaves around the edge to have a little shine to them. So I'm going to just leave a little bit of pure white around the very edges to indicate that, those shimmering leaves. It's part of the reason I wanted at least some of the color of the tree down before I painted any more of it, so I could know where to leave out little patches of white for those leaves. And for the rest of the tree, we're just going to paint right through it. I'm transitioning to more cerulean blue as we get towards the horizon, because that's a lighter blue than cobalt. So that'll give kind of gradient as we go down towards the horizon. And most of this tree is going to be darker than the sky, believe it or not. It can be hard to tell by looking at the picture, but that's where value studies come in handy, and I will show you my value study as soon as this wash is done. Something I wanted to talk about today is using value studies and how useful and important they are, and why I'm trying to make a habit of using them more often. Just mixing in some of this, I believe this is turquoise, as I get right above the horizon. And you do want to leave a few spots in the middle of the mass of the tree where the sky is shining through. So that it doesn't look so solid, it looks like it's made of leaves instead of something more dense than that. Yeah, I'm always trying to get a really nice gradient with skies, even if it's, a pretty simple blue sky like this. Maybe there's some clouds on the horizon here, I'll leave that white, and what I'll do, I'll clean this brush off. I could use just a separate brush for this, but I'm lazy. I'm a lazy painter, so another reason I got this brush. It's kind of all in one. I can almost do the whole painting with this one brush, which is exactly what I want. So this brush is now clean and damp. And what I can do is, while this is still wet, I can take the edge and kind of fuzz it, just like that. Just give a very mild impression of maybe clouds or something on the horizon. Nothing too crazy, very simple. My goal with this painting is to be nice and loose. And something that is extremely helpful for painting loosely is value studies. So essentially what this is for dividing the painting into three values. You've got lights, which is the white of the paper, and then you've got your mid-range, which is all the middle gray that you see, and then you've got your darks, which is the darker gray that you see. So what I had to do first was look at my photo and decide, okay, I've got all this detail going on, but I need to simplify this so that it's actually paintable, because I can't paint. I mean, look at how much detail there is just in the ground. There's so many textures, there's all these rocks. They're all different sizes. You've got sand, you've got these plants, you've got the trees. Even though it's a very simple scene, there is an almost infinite amount of detail that you can get lost in, and that's not what I want. I'm trying to paint more loosely and more impressionistically and more freely. So this forces you to decide, okay, these objects are going to be middle value. All of them are going to be in the middle value. And what I'm trying to do is find one big shape that's in the middle value range, and I'm trying to decide, okay, what am I going to include in this middle value shape? So you can see right here, this is the top of the bank, these trees or these bushes, and then it goes down into the grass, comes back over into the shadow of the tree, up the trunk into the mass of the tree itself, out towards these other trees, down into these plants, over into these plants, over here into the rocks, up into this tree, up into the other bank on the left, and then these rocks on the side. So this is all just one big shape with a few broken up spots here and there. And you can see I'm kind of trying to create this spiral motion where your eye does this, right? It's kind of zigzagging around like that. It's a very interesting motion, and that's kind of what my eyes picked up on when I first saw this scene. Even though I didn't know it, like I knew it instinctively. Like there's something here that could be a scene. And I was picking up on the contrast between the trees and the sky, the colors of the trees, but also the motion. So the value study is so useful for not just finding the middle value, but for also making sure you have a strong composition, because you can tell exactly what's going on. Even if I hadn't put the darks in, you would be able to tell basically what this is. So the white of the paper represents the first wash. And then what we're going to do next is add, I'm basically just following what I did in my value study. And that's another advantage, is you do your painting ahead of time. It's like a practice run for your painting. And you kind of get a feel of where things are. I can already tell you some of the adjustments that I'm going to make in this painting versus the value study. And we can get into that a little bit as we go along. So you can make small adjustments. It's basically a first draft. And then you can also see where I added the darks, which is the third wash. Just a few smudges here and there, just to indicate a little bit of volume in the foliage, and then some darker areas of the shadows. Some of the rocks are going to be darker. The trunks of the trees, some of the trunks of the trees are going to be darker. Trying not to have too many darks in the corners. I'll probably darken up some of these rocks in the foreground. I'll add some texture to the ground. But this is all stuff that you can plan ahead of time in your value study. So I highly, highly recommend that you get into the habit of doing this, and that's what I'm going to do. Every painting I do from now on is going to have a value study to go with it. So let's see how we're doing with the drying. Still very wet. So I'm going to go ahead, let this dry a little more, and then we'll come back and we'll get going with that second wash, where we're going to start probably here, and we're just going to drop in some darker green, probably mixing the same kind of green that I used originally, just with more pigment in it. And we're just going to connect that shape through the entire painting all the way across and over here. So I will see you when the paper's a little drier. Okay, paper should be dry enough now. I could use a hair dryer, but I prefer to just let it dry on its own. Gives things a chance to kind of move around a little bit more, kind of fuzz out just a little bit more. You can kind of see that right here in this tree. See how the edges are just kind of blooming out into the sky? If I had used my hair dryer, it would have frozen everything in place. And sometimes you have to do that because of time, but if I can avoid it, I'd rather let it dry on its own. It is a little tiny bit damp still, just a little bit. You take the back of your hand and kind of lightly touch. If it feels cold, that means it's still wet or damp. So here we go. This is where things really start to come together. So, remembering my value study, I actually have it right here propped up, and I'm basically just using that as a roadmap. I've already painted this once. I know exactly what to expect. So we're just gonna go. As soon as I finish mixing this color here. I just want to get a little more on the palette, ready to go. And I'm going to be adding different colors into this green as we go. Oh man. Oh, those trees are going to be taller now. I'm still getting used to this new brush, so it's splattering. So, not a problem. We'll just make these trees taller. Might end up working out pretty well, actually. So I'm just looking at my reference photo, and then also the value study. Probably looking more so at the value study at this point. They got like a more reddish thing going on as they come down. I was like adding little variations in my foliage. It makes it look a lot more lifelike. I can use the tip of this brush to get smaller details. Just giving little indications to, you know, plants kind of come down the bank in certain areas. Livening up this yellow a little bit with some lemon yellow. I found that cobalt blue is really good for more subdued greens. So is ultramarine blue. I would say green might be one of the most complex colors because it can be made of, it's always made of at least two other colors, blue and yellow. But it can also have all these other variations in it. You can have red, you can have orange, you can have brown, you can have gray, and it's all green. It's all just shades of green. That's why I don't use pre-mixed green. I always mix my own greens because I want to be able to control exactly what it's doing. And I find that the pre-mixed green just looks synthetic. Sometimes that's what I want. Sometimes I need a synthetic green, so I'll have a little on standby just in case, but I almost never use it. I think I use it mostly for like street lights, that kind of thing, or signs, things that are clearly man-made. So let's try something here with this brush. So I'm going to try to splay the ends like that, and I'm just going to like add texture to the top of these bushes just a little bit. Yeah, like that. Wow, this brush is awesome. So see how easily I just added texture to the top of these plants, just indicating that textural quality only at the top, because that's kind of where you can see it most clearly, is against the sky. So there's some shadows going on in the ground. This brush holds a ton of water. Another reason that I wanted to pick it up. Some more cobalt blue for the shadows. Mixing it with some of this burnt umber. You might think this looks too dark at the moment. But keep in mind, always remember, watercolor dries several tones lighter than when you put it on the paper. Just kind of hinting at some of these just cast shadows. Just little touches here and there. I'm really trying to not get lost in detail. That's something that I've been just struggling with. I want to paint more loosely and impressionistically. Minimal amount of brush strokes. just the bare minimum to convey your idea. And so this is going to touch right into that tree trunk, which I'll come back to in a minute. Let's see, I need to work on this edge before it dries, so that the constant game of bouncing back and forth between different areas of the painting before things dry on you. So you do have to be on top of that. Always keep in mind how dry or wet things are. Some more splatters. This painting's just gonna be sloppy. I'm just getting used to this new brush, but that's okay. This is supposed to be a loose impressionistic painting anyway. So I want this yellow to be a little lighter, so it's got more, excuse me, it's got more yellow in it than blue, right? Just giving the impression of these plants. And again, this is all laid out in my value study. It's already done. I've already done the hard part, which is condensing this infinitely complex scene into 3 values. It just makes for more satisfying composition. It reads much better, especially if you're standing at a distance. So I'm going to try to do that same thing again, where I splay this brush out like that, and then I can just use these ragged edges, and I can kind of drop in the top of these bushes or grass or whatever this is. I actually do know quite a bit about botany and plants, but I didn't bother finding out what these were. So as long as the edge is wet, I'm totally fine. I don't need to worry about it. So that's why I'm kind of bouncing back and forth as to what side I'm working on, so that I'm always working with a wet edge. So we're going to go into the darker part of this tree here. I need to mix a dark yellow brown, yellow ochre, maybe some cobalt blue, or excuse me, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, maybe throw some orange in there. Orange, burnt umber, orange and cobalt blue. That'll make a nice brownish color. Don't need to go too dark, not yet. Just touching that right into the edge of these plants. It's all flowing together. It's all blending into itself. I am going to liven up this area right here with a more pure orange. Not completely pure, but just a little more lively. I'm just going to glaze over it. So I'm just taking this pure orange and dropping it into this brownish color, tapping it on my rag. And something like that should be pretty good. And this tree has a little trunk in it, but that's going to be part of the dark. Okay. So let's work on the trunk of that tree there. Just mixing up a cool gray. being pretty careful painting the trunk. Those edges where you've got really high contrast between the dark and the light in the background. And this color just goes right down into these rocks here. I'm painting around some of the highlights that I see in the rocks along the one face of the rock. There's sun hitting it. That's just going to continue out that way and then also this way. So that's why I dropped down that cooler gray color beforehand, because that now becomes the highlight color of these rocks. Then we've got a beautiful cast shadow from this tree. Actually, that is the first thing that caught my eye when I was standing in this wash. I love long shadows like that. I will never get tired of painting them. And this shadow has a lot of character. There's a lot happening in it, but I'm going to simplify it as best I can. I've lightly outlined in pencil where the edges of the shadow is, or where the edges are. But that's only a rough guide. You see me quickly flicking my brush like that. I'm trying to get some dry brush strokes to give some of that dappled light effect. Just a little bit. I'm not going to go crazy with it. Just blurring the edge of that with my finger. Shadow's a little fuzzy. If the object that's casting the shadow is farther away from the shadow itself, the shadow will be fuzzier as it gets farther and farther away, and the light becomes more diffused and more light bounces around the object. I'll come back and darken up some of this shadow in the next step. So we got these rocks here. Remembering to look at my value study. Just giving a few little hints of small rocks out in the wash. Just giving a little hint of the shape of some of these rocks. Okay, then we move over this way. And we're going to go back into that foliage right there. I'm going to finish this tree before I work on that area anymore. Just dropping some of these limbs in there. Alright. The reason I'm not painting them all the way up is because they will get fuzzed out once I drop in the canopy, which is what I'm going to do now. So now going into lemon yellow and cobalt blue. It's actually this whatever blue color I had mixed there, gray, blue. Nice natural subdued green, but a little more vibrant than what's in the background, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute here when I put this down. Needs to be a little darker. So leaving a few gaps here and there where the sky can show through. Giving the impression of slightly more detail as I get towards the edge. Just letting it fuzz right back into that tree there. It's all blending together and fuzzing and doing cool stuff that you can't predict. In a way, it's kind of painting itself. I'm dropping in some cobalt blue just right into the paint that's on the paper, just where I know there's going to be darker areas, just so that it starts fuzzing and getting these kind of soft wet into wet effects just within this tree. I might do the same on this one too, just a little bit. Trees is a good opportunity to use both hard edges and soft edges in the same shape. Painting clouds is the same. In fact, painting clouds and painting trees is very similar. And we continue on to the trees in the background. Slightly different variation on green. Just helps separate these as distinct trees. Now we're going to go back into that duller green. So constantly varying the shade of green will really help make it look more natural. Making sure I'm not losing track of where I'm at in my reference photo there, because that is my map. Darker orange brown kind of thing going on. These fall colored trees. I'm going to add a few areas of really vibrant orange here and there. but I'm leaving some of that color that I painted at first under there. There'll be little highlights that show through. Just a few areas, just a few. Just a few little Easter eggs for your eyes. And then it gets green again towards the back. So much variety. In the third wash, we're going to actually define the shapes of each of these individual trees a little better, but just enough to give you the impression that they're separate trees. Just a littlest hint of separation. That's my goal. That's what I'm going for. We'll see if it works. I think it will. So, more of that dull green, going into ultramarine blue now because I'm out of cobalt and I don't feel like putting more on the palette. And the green is similar enough that it won't be a problem. Just adds more variety. Touching right into where I left off on this shape here. Comes over here to these plants. Same dusty green. Constantly varying my brush strokes. If I'm using the same kind of brush stroke the whole time, it's going to look stiff and unrealistic. See, and that connects right into that shadow there. And we're going to do this area and the background. I'll just mix up a grayish thing. Oh, I guess there is some cobalt blue left. This brush really just sucks up paint. It's like a vacuum cleaner. It's great. I really, really love this brush. So we'll do the background first. Just a little swipe. It's very, very close to my value study. There's a few differences. There's a shadow there. Just really slight differences. in the shape. That's why it's great to do the value study, because I've already painted it once and I can decide if I want to change something the second time around. So take that same color, mix it into that musty green. You can go up into this bank, paint around these bright yellow leaves, kind of giving it a jagged edge that'll give you the impression that that's leaves, that those are leaves. Now, the trunk disappeared. A lot of it did anyway, but that's fine, because in the third wash, we're going to darken that up a little bit. Same goes with this trunk here. We'll darken that up too. All right. So we got to add in some of these rocks that come towards us in the foreground. Nice, beautiful, cool gray rocks. And I'm just gonna see if I can loosely indicate just a few of these shadows going on. Kind of just trying to copy what I did in my value study. At the end, I'll come and add some more texture for the sand. So I can actually paint a few specific rocks, painting around the highlight. And then with the third wash, I can come in and darken the shadow edge of these rocks. Some more here too. Okay. There's a tree trunk there. Darken that up later. Some darker stuff going on back here that I can just drop in now. Let it fuzz a little bit. Okay. I'll make that a rock too, why not? This tree needs to be painted actually. Almost done with the second wash. Drop in some orange into that gray blue. Gives you kind of a brownish color. Oh, it's a little too brown. More orange. Clean that brush off. It's getting muddy. That's what I want. That's what I want. Okay. Kind of just tapping gives you the impression of those little leaves on there. Do that here a little bit too. Just adding a little bit more texture in these rocky areas with a light wash of whatever this color is, just a mix of everything on my palette. This is just adding some texture to the ground. I'm just kind of indicating how these little areas of pebbles are laying, strewn across the ground. There's some like tracks or something from, I don't know, a quad or something. Makes it just a little more interesting. Okay. Now, let's put the darks in. Now there should only be a few areas that I need to do this for. This is where you can add some separation between things. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. That's a good idea. This brush is really good for detail work. It's not as good at holding water though, but it'll do just fine. Just darkening up this trunk. Once this area is dried more, I'm going to add in some of those branches, just a few of them. Darkening up some of the shadow. And this is still a little bit wet, so it's gonna blend in really nicely. It's gonna kind of fuzz out. And it'll lighten up as it goes to the left or to the right. Just adding some of those darker rocks here and there. This is where things really start to take on a 3D look. And everything finally comes together after all your work. Watercolor is funny like that. It really doesn't look very good until the very, very end when you start adding the darks. It's definitely a game of delayed gratification. Some smudges in here for random rocks or sticks or whatever. Just adding a little texture to these plants. So these little dark areas can give you just a hint of separation between these. I think these are mesquite trees. You don't need much, just a little bit. That's all you need. Especially in a background like this where I'm really not as concerned about too much detail. Don't really want your eye to be too drawn to this area, and adding really dark areas is going to draw your eye, especially if they're next to really light areas. High contrast attracts your eye. So now I've just created the edge of this tree right here by adding that dark in the background, which is basically what's on my value study. Now the value study is definitely a simplified version of what I end up doing, but it's close enough. Does not need to be super detailed. So now we can do some splattering here, get some of that sandy texture, that gravelly, gritty texture, just in a few spots. Some of it's gonna fuzz out because there's some wet, damp areas here still. Now, the more water you have on your brush when you do this, the bigger the droplets are going to be, so keep that in mind. I'm also angling it towards myself so that it doesn't splatter up in the sky. I'm getting as close to the paper as I can so that I can control where this is happening. If you practice that technique, it's a really good way to get just quick textures going on. And I'm just quickly kind of swiping my brush around, just trying to be random. Doing some dry brushing here and there, because I am not going to paint all of these rocks. I do not want to do that. You would never finish the painting if you tried to do that. And it honestly wouldn't look very good. I'll give that rock a little shadow, why not? Just add some interest. All right, it's looking pretty good so far. So I'm with the very tip of the brush just painting these little vertical strokes just at the base of this plant. This value study is helping me not go crazy with the darks, because I already know where they basically need to be. I'll mix up a really dark green for this main tree here. All right, we're getting pretty close, I would say. So I need this area to dry a lot more, and I need to add in some of those smaller branches. So I'm going to let that dry, and I'll be right back. We're back, and we're dry. So let's just drop in a few of these branches. I want to give the impression of them poking out from beneath or from behind the foliage. So I'm kind of breaking up the line as I go. Even though in the photo, most of these branches are actually completely visible because the canopy is sparse. I think it's lost a lot of its leaves already. But for the painting, this is the idea I want to go with. That's the thing about painting, you can just make it different if you want than what the photo shows. Let's see if this is still wet enough to, yeah, just barely. So I can take the edge of my fingernail and just scratch out a few lighter branches like that. I should have done that while it was still a little more wet, but it is what it is. I'm spending the most time on this tree because this is definitely the main character of the painting. Just adding in some of these other trunks. Giving less detail as it gets farther away. Maybe some dead branches sticking off to the side there. I like that little detail in the picture, in the reference photo. So I can take my liner brush for those really small details. Just rolling it in the paint gives it a sharp tip. Just lightly dropping in some dead twigs just right there. That's all I'm going to do. Just looking at it one time more just to see if there's anything I want to add. And there is. first I'm going to put my signature on since I'm thinking about it. We'll just do this with whatever this color is. Need to move this out of the way. So, last step, I'm going to do a few little things with gouache, just white artist gouache, titanium white, or permanent white, as it's also known. I just want to add a few tiny highlights here and there, just on a few of these rocks. I mean, just in a few areas. That's it. That's all I'm doing. Done. Just kind of dragging it around. It's just straight from the tube. I haven't added any water to it because I want it to be more dry and sticky. I'm just making these rocks a little sparkly, a little more shiny. Gouache is actually watercolor. It's just opaque watercolor because it has more pigment in it. And I want to just, so now I am going to add some water because I need it to be a little more fluid. I'm just going to paint the edge of this branch, just the very, very edge. Just make it stand out a little bit. Maybe this one too. And one of my favorite things to do is that same splatter technique, but with gouache. I'm going to do it on the tree. A little more water. A little less water. See how those droplets are really big? There we go. That'll make the tree sparkle. I'll just add a few random sparkles here and there, just a little tiny bit. And I think I'm going to call that done. So thank you very much for watching if you made it this far. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you on the next one.